Chapter 6 Special People, Dewsbury Rugby League Club and the UK Finals. Your vision will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Carl Jung. In the early 1990s, I bought my first house and set up my clinic. It was a Victorian house with high ceilings and 2 big reception rooms. I decided to turn one of the 3 bedrooms into my living room and use the downstairs as my clinic area. The house was called West Grove, so that's the name I gave my clinic. I love the Victorian era, upstairs downstairs being one of my favourite TV series, a love I shared with Mrs. Hurst. Mrs. Hurst was my English teacher and the senior mistress at Thornalley School, who later became a patient of mine. A fun, amazing woman who I was blessed to get to know. She died of cancer, and I felt her loss. I really connected with her. Hilary was kind enough to leave me all her upstairs-downstairs videos, which I cherish to this day. Thank you, Hilary. A few years before getting my own place to work from, I was concentrating on home visits to treat friends and their families. But it was my voluntary work with the under-19s Dewsbury Rugby League Club team that led me down my destined work path. My theory was I could help the team and also get hands-on experience that no textbook or teacher could ever give me. Boy, what a shock I got when I did my first match. The problem is that people believe you know everything. I believe the day anyone thinks they have no more to learn from any person, no matter what it is or the background that person comes from, is a day when you may as well stop breathing. On this first match, I had to run on the pitch to a damaged shoulder, AC joint injury, a dislocated finger, damaged thumb, head injury, and many other knocks and bruises. It was crazy. But I was hooked, and my love and passion for the game remains to this day. In the late 80s and 90s, the game was so different than it is today. Moving to summer rugby, I believe, was a bad move. I voiced my concerns, but I think the move was more to do with the Sky television and profit than the spirit of the game. When matches were played on wet muddy field, there were fewer general injuries. On cold frosty days, the officials decided whether the pitch was too hard for the game to commence. But when summer rugby arrived, nobody seemed to acknowledge that a dry spell and even the English sun could bake the ground and make my injury count increase, not to mention the problem of dehydration. There was something magical about rugby in winter. The fans went for a drink, got their rugby fix, and then went home, usually via the pub, to a traditional Sunday dinner, with Yorkshire puddings of course, and then would watch Scrum Down on TV, usually falling asleep at the same time. Rugby has advanced so much today, and they don't even wear shoulder pads. Maybe I'm just nostalgic for the time that I was professionally involved with the wonderful sport of rugby league. I was asked to help with the other team, not just the under-19s, which I did willingly. I was hungry for knowledge and to gain first-hand experience of injuries and treating them. This is when I started working with the first and second teams. Because my work was hands-on, massage, not just machines, the guys preferred my treatment. My first sole responsibility for Dewsbury came about in a somewhat dramatic way. We were all on the bus an early start because we were playing away at one of the Cumbrians teams. We were just about to set off when these cars appeared at speed. The men came on the bus and proceeded to escort the Dewsbury physio off, Keith Shaw, To this day, I don't know what happened, but he never came back. I was asked if I would take over and help them out for the match. Of course I would, but I was very nervous. Being thrown in at the deep end, you either sink or swim. With the help of the lads doing their own strapping and helping me out, I didn't sink. It was more like treading water than actually swimming, but together we got through it. I was blessed with a kind, funny, and at times crazy but respectful and loving group of guys. Passionate about their sport and dedicated, 90% of the time, to doing the work to recover from any injuries that they may have had. I mentioned earlier a famous rugby family from the Dewsbury, West Yorkshire area, Liversedge to be exact. The father of this family, Mark Burgess, was a strong, powerful player, a gentle soul with a wicked sense of humour. I remember his family coming to watch him play, and anyone who is a fan of rugby league will know about his 4 boys, Luke, Sam, George and Tom, the famous Burgess boys, making history by eventually all 4 of them playing for the same professional rugby team in Oz, the Robertos, at the same time, on the same day, in the same team. What an achievement! The genes and passion given to them and the encouragement at a young age obviously paying off. When I have seen them play, I see their father's grit and strength and intelligence of the game within them. I worked with Mark for several years. Because of his fearlessness and the position he played, number 8, he was often on the treatment table. I remember on one occasion, while playing at Crown Flat, Mark got a head-eye tackle, which was allowed in those days. Though I often searched out the other team's head-eye tackler after the match and gave them a piece of my mind. It's such a dangerous, cowardly and unnecessary movement, often carried out by those who lack the skill or courage to do a proper tackle. I understand that it can happen by accident, but in some teams they seem to have a designated hitman who got my opinion after the match, no matter who they were, and that would include my own players too. Going back to Mark, he was down in the 9-hole area, the slope on the pitch of Crown Flat. As I got to him, he was sort of having a fit, his eyes rolling back, and he was speaking in a foreign language, which I think was French. I tried desperately to open his airways, but the slope and Mark's weight made it impossible to move him. I then saw he couldn't breathe, because his tongue had fallen back and was blocking his airway. I made the quick decision, an instinctive one, to get hold of his tongue, a dangerous thing to do as he could have bitten my fingers, for he was fitting, but I wasn't going to let him die. The game continued, the referee not stopping. He got a piece of my mind after the game and tried to patronise me by saying, "Now, let me explain the rules of the game to you, idiot." It must be noted that there were very few female physiotherapists working with professional rugby teams at this time, and we got a lot of flack in this male-dominated environment. Back on the pitch, I was trying to hold Mark's tongue and support his body while he was fitting. The game going on around us. The scene must have looked serious because some of the crowds nearby were climbing over the small fence to get to me and Mark. Eventually the match was stopped. I think the crowd's shouts had some effect. With help, we managed to get Mark in the recovery position, and he was coming round. By now there was the St John ambulance on the pitch with a stretcher, as well as Dewsbury's coach, Maurice Bamford, ex-Great Britain coach and a person my dad knew well, plus the officials. I was trying to get Mark off the pitch and to hospital, while the ref and Maurice Bamford were having a full-blown argument about the match. I was livid. Mark was seriously unwell, and these guys were shouting and arguing over the top of him. I gave them a bollocking, and they stopped, but then the ref wouldn't let the St John ambulance man stretch Mark straight off the pitch, but made them carry him the longest way to the dressing room. What? Throughout my years, I got several speakings to by referees who stopped the game to do so. It was usually because I had run the shortest distance to get to my player that was down. My job was to get the players off the pitch with minimal injury and not in a body bag. All of these refs got my opinion and a piece of my mind after the match. They were feeding their power and ego and not their common sense. Eventually my protective and no bullshit reputation went before me. Mark recovered and got back playing the game he loved and was so passionate for. He did do some coaching and no doubt was busy with his 4 boys who were starting to be noticed in the rugby arena. As is so typical of life, you come in contact with people on your path of life and then you venture down a different path, and your paths may never cross again. But sometimes your paths are destined to cross again, for one reason or another. When Mark Burgess and my path crossed again, it was a painful and difficult one, nearly 15 years later. I got to hear that Mark wasn't very well, and amateur clubs such as Thornhill and Dewsbury Moor were holding fundraising events to raise money for Mark. I had bumped into Mark a few times over the years, but I was no longer involved in rugby. Mark had gone on to do some coaching, one of those teams being at Nottingham. He asked me to physio for them, but I just didn't have the time. He also coached his 4 sons, who all played rugby. When I heard that he wasn't well, I went to see him. Since that day on the 9-hole at Crown Flat, I had a certain bond with him, a need to make sure he was okay, a need to help and take care of him. I had this feeling with all those who were in my life, but the sheer fear and shock of seeing Mark struggling that day on the rugby pitch gave us an unspoken connection. I remember being in a Dewsbury pub one weekend, a thing I rarely did. It may have been someone's birthday or something, but Mark was there. It was great to see him, and we chatted. Someone else came to chat too, another rugby player, and Mark explained that I had saved his life. I never saw it like that. All I saw was one of my players having a problem, and I did all I could to stop that problem. I was never going to give up on him. All these years later, I knew his diagnosis was serious, but maybe I could help him now. I visited his home at Liversedge many times to help with massage and acupuncture. Mark struggled to talk, but his personality was still the same, being funny and being the person I remembered. His physical appearance, however, was so different. The big, powerful body that used to knock players out of his way and tackle like a man possessed was no longer there, but Mark was. I don't know if what I was doing even helped his physical body, but we had a laugh, had some sadness, and took the piss out of each other. From a psychological point, I think my visits uplifted him. But motor neuron is a cruel, devastating, soul-destroying imprisonment in your own body. It's torturous for those whose body is fighting it, but equally as torturous for the people around who have to watch this slow, painful process, taking away every bodily function from the person they love, the person that had been their rock, their source of strength, their mentor, their guiding light, their coach, and their father. Sam was the one I saw the most, who was Mark's main carer and lived with his dad, his two younger brothers George and Tom, and their beautiful, intelligent, empathic black Labrador. I saw Luke on my visits also, but not George or Tom too often. They may have been at school. Both Sam and Luke were playing professional rugby, Sam at Bradford Northern and Luke at Leeds Rhinos. It was probably around 2006 when I went to see and treat Mark. The disease affects muscle movements, slowly destroying the cells that are supposed to send messages to allow movement. Eventually the muscles are weakened and waste away. Seeing this shadow of the former big, strong, muscular professional rugby player sat with his loyal dog by his side broke my heart. Mark still had his sense of humour and he joked a lot. I wanted to treat Mark as I had always done, not seeing the diseased body, but his spirit, which was courageous and strong. As time passed, it was more and more difficult to understand his words, so he would write things down. I knew that this cruel disease would, eventually, get the better of this amazing human being, and my treatments wouldn't stop that. But I would continue while ever he wanted me to visit him. I got to know Sam and Luke, and even took a look at an injury or two. Their respect and love for their dad was so obvious. They had this wonderful banter and positivity with each other. No self-pity or selfishness, just unconditional love. Sam was at the Bradford Northern and he was getting into the first team. He must have only just turned 17. We talked a lot about rugby and his dream of visiting Australia. I had connections with Australia and encouraged him to visit, the world being his oyster. The last time I saw Mark was when I turned up at his house to treat him, but he must have forgotten our arrangement because Sam was carrying Mark down the drive to put him in the car. Sam then went back into the house and I stayed talking to Mark, who was sat in the front passenger seat, tears rolling down his cheeks. He looked so very sad. I chatted to him, gave him a big hug and a kiss on his cheek. Sam came back. They seemed to be in a rush to be somewhere. I said my goodbyes and went to my car. Now I had tears rolling down my cheeks. I knew I would never see him again. In my mind I was questioning the cruelty of our world. Why did it have to pick on the good ones? I was angry with the universe and angry with myself for not being able to help Mark, as I had been able to do all those years before. Mark died in 2007, and there were that many people at his funeral that the police had to be there to control the traffic. The small church at Liversedge was packed inside and outside. It was so sad, but at the same time so beautiful to see all the people that Mark and his family had connected with. Players from Bradford Northern and Leeds Rhinos were there, and some of the overseas players wore their traditional clothing as a sign of respect for Mark and his family. There were many people from the rugby environment, and it was amazing to see them all toast Mark in the pub after. My friend Andy Tyers was there from Sheffield, who got to know Mark while he was at Nottingham, which gave us a chance to catch up. On that day, the strength of character of his 4 boys shone through with pride, honour, respect, and a deep love for the man that had been their foundation, built out of granite, love, and a passion for a sport that they would continue to build on and to reach amazing levels of success in. Mark's legacy living on through them, and I believe he has never left their side, watching over them with pride and, of course, that wicked sense of humour that he had. One of life's unsung heroes, Mark Burgess. I didn't send them a card, but wrote them a poem instead and gave them that. I believe it was sent to them from their loving father. Another interesting situation which occurred involved Neil Kelly, known as Ned. It was at a home game at Crown Flat. Neil took a knock on his arm. I ran on with my magic sponge and he continued playing. I wasn't happy with the way he was holding and protecting his arm. It was not Ned's style. I kept a close eye on him and was on and off the pitch going to Ned. I told him to come off, but he wouldn't. We got to half time and the doctor took a look at Ned. Half time in the dressing room was a bit crazy. I was re-strapping and looking at any concerns that any of the players had, encouraging them and assessing their injury. Often the coach would be shouting, the volume dictated by how the game was going. On this occasion it was Maurice Bamford, whose coaching methods involved a lot of shouting and swearing. He had demanded that the doctor look at Ned because he had gone down so much but always got back up. The doctor said he had badly bruised his arm. On the way out for the second half, I managed to say to Ned that he needed to go down at the first tackle and stay down, for his arm was not right. It must be noted that Maurice Bamford did not agree with females being involved with rugby and was always questioning my reason for treating the players. In fact, on one occasion, he came into the treatment area and one of the players, I think it may have been David Watkinson, who had a knee injury, a ligament pull or tear, he was waiting for the specialist appointment, was under the heat lamp. Maurice said, "Now, let me ask you something. You can keep the heat lamp on for 1 minute, 1 hour or a week, and it won't repair a tear. So why are you treating him?" My reply was, "Yes, you are correct. But I'm using the lamp to warm the area up, encourage blood flow." I had already massaged the thigh and knee area, including the back of the knee and hamstrings, to encourage healing. But what you haven't taken into consideration is the psychological aspect of an athlete with an injury. He will be more confident and feel less anxiety about his problem, which will help him through his training. And it gives me an opportunity to feel, see and assess his injury before and after training. Maurice left the room. He had nothing more to say. It must be noted that I was in my early 20s. Maurice Bamford was a formidable character, an ex-Great Britain coach, and if you knew what was good for you, you didn't get on the wrong side of him, especially if you were a player. I was speaking the truth. I wasn't there to feel a rugby player's leg, but to do my job. I think he, Maurice, gave me a tiny bit of respect after that, though he kept it well hidden. Remember, I was supposed to be at home making Yorkshire puddings. That's what he once announced on the team bus one Sunday night on our long trip back from Cumbria. I think he didn't like the fact that I got on well with the players and had their respect, while Morris could feel any respect he had from them was slowly being eroded by the way he treated some of them. All that said, I did like Morris. It's a case of better the devil you know. That's why I went to work with him a few years later at Bramley. Back to the second half of the game. Ned did not stay down on his first tackle, his second or third. I was on and off the pitch. He was holding his arm so badly. Each time I went on, Morris would give me a mouthful of abuse. Stop effing fussing over him, blah 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 effing blah. On my third return from running onto Ned, who I had just told I think he had a broken arm and he must not get up after his next tackle, Morris was out of the dugout and shouting at me. I then picked my wet sponge up and threw it at him, saying, "Treat him your fucking self. He has a broken arm and should have been off in the first half." The next tackle, Neil did stay down and came off and went to the hospital. Morris was not happy with me and reminded me that the doctor had seen the arm and it was only bruised and I was pissing about and fussing too much. Later in the clubhouse, Neil returned from hospital with a pot on his broken arm. Morris was a little kinder to me from that day, but I still think he believed I should be at home on Sundays making the Sunday dinner. There were so many great personalities and friendships formed at Dewsbury Rugby Club. It was a caring family atmosphere. The partners and wives of the players were supportive and involved, which I believe is essential. The only thing they didn't get involved with was the end of season piss-up, usually a weekend away. I remember going on a couple, one being with Dewsbury, and spent most of my time laughing at their drunken activities and making sure they were safe, for I was never a drinker. I never really drank after games, for I always had to drive home even after away matches, drink driving being one of my lifetime disapprovals. I was knowledgeable of the effects it would have on a person's body and their physical and mental reactions through my profession and my bodybuilding. It was my number one pet hate. I was known to take beer off the players if they had, for example, a dead leg after the match, explaining recovery needs to be allowed to start straight away, and I would not be treating them on Monday if they drank and, as was the tradition, staying out and even going to a nightclub. I remember one of the Lancashire signings, a good player, who came from St Helens or Widnes, if I remember correctly, who had an injury, and he went on a bit of a night out. I refused to treat him for the whole week. He was not happy, but he was not being responsible and thought I had a pair of magic wands, not a pair of hands. I knew I could work miracles with my dedication and massage, but if you will not do your bit, I will dedicate my energy to those that will. Going back to drink driving, I believe that the law should be zero alcohol in your system. Then no chances can be taken. I remember one drinking person said that would not be fair because you may still have alcohol in your system from the day or night before, and therefore should be allowed to have some in your system. If there is any alcohol or drugs in your system, it will affect a person's ability to drive. End of story. How ironic that my car accident would involve an aged driver who liked to drink and who no doubt was on prescribed drugs, none of which was investigated. But more on that later. Back to the personalities of Dewsbury Rugby League. Part of the fixtures and fittings there was a guy nicknamed Chili, Chris Hill. He was a kit man along with a man named Keith Fortis. Keith often took down statistics during the matches. Chili was a quiet man, but he saw and heard everything. If you wanted anything more strapping, another pair of socks, Chili was the man. He had a bunch of keys, was always there, and worked really hard. The club played a big part in his life, often being undervalued. I had a good connection with Chili, and he taught me a lot. I was in my 20s, spent my life in education, surrounded by the educated ones. But Chili taught me how much you can learn from people of all walks of life. Society tends to make judgments of a person by what they have achieved, and their academic background. The biggest thing Chili demonstrated to me was contentment with one's life. To be kind and caring, and to be just who you are, no matter how others see you or judge you. It's a difficult act to follow, Chili, but at least I got shown it existed. Thank you, Chili. Your father, who was on the committee at Dewsbury, he was also a tireless worker for the club. He was also a kind, gentle soul. Rare in this day and age, but I believe the new decade, 2021, is a time of change and a movement towards Chili and his father's attributes. Here's hoping. Others involved in rugby league that I was lucky to meet included Ray Abbey, Sean Dunford and Jack Addy, to name but a few. These men also had connections with Crown Flat. And when I knew them, their involvement was on the coaching side. I was around Jack Addy for a longer spell than Ray Abbey. I liked their personalities and passion for the game. Jack was a bit of a ladies' man, with a mischievous cheek to him. He once told me that he could have been my dad because he tried to date my mum, but I think her heart had already been taken by the tank. It's sad to see these passionate characters of the past slowly leaving us for the rugby pitches far, far away. But I have no doubt that they keep an eye on things. In fact, Jack was a bit put out that I had forgotten to mention him. Remember, I hear voices? I hadn't really, Jack. How can you and your fellow rugby generations ever be forgotten? Dad, as I write, is still kicking, maybe not a rugby ball, but the inevitable time machine is catching up to him, and since we lost my mum a couple of years ago, I think he misses her company and care. But they have all lived their lives with courage and passion, and been involved with the best northern sport there is, giving hours of drama, entertainment and dedication for others to watch and be part of. In these strange times, 2020-2021, we must do all we can to keep this sport alive and kicking for the next generations to benefit from. It's part of the Northern people's DNA. So why did I leave Dewsbury Rugby League team? Another important lesson I learned was not to believe or trust a person, especially a chairman, that wouldn't look you in the eye. Alias Rodney Hardcastle. This is how it went. I used to block out Monday evenings at my clinic from 6 p.m. for any of the players to come for treatment they used to train Tuesdays and Thursdays. I went to the club on these days. It was essential to treat them as soon as possible after a match, and it also allowed players with ongoing injuries to still train yet be able to have some treatment on Monday. The number that showed up didn't matter. If I worked till midnight, so be it. I wanted them back fit and available for team selection. There is a big element of psychology in sport, in fact, everything we do in life. Getting into the player's head and them trusting you being vital for progress. I was blessed to have that from my training partner for my bodybuilding, Dembo. He was in my head and I trusted him. I still do. I never questioned anything but gave him 100% of the time. That's how we got to the EFBB UK Bodybuilding Championships Grand Finals in Harrogate, Yorkshire, Sunday the 15th of October 1989. I mentioned earlier in the note from the author that certain songs guide me and were significant in my life. The song that Dembo and I had for our training was Tina Turner's Simply the Best. It's still powerful today, and only last year I sent Kate and Dembo 2 roses for their garden, a beautiful perfumed one for Kay as she talked about her fond memories of a perfumed rose around her childhood home front door. The rose I sent for Kay was called Nostalgia, with a strong perfume, cream and red in colour. Dembo's was a yellowy peachy colour, one called, yes you guessed it, Simply the Best. In the 90s I also surprised them by taking them to a Tina Turner concert at Woburn Abbey, Bedfordshire, England. That song, even today, allows me to work harder and realise how blessed I am to have such amazing people in my world. Back to the story of leaving Dewsbury Rugby Club. Mr. Hardcastle questioned why I billed a club for 2 hours, £30, when maybe only one player or no players turned up. That never happened. My answer was, I closed my clinic to anyone else, so I am free to concentrate on the Dewsbury players. He said we can't keep paying it. I think I may have asked for a small increase in my rate for match days and training nights a few weeks before. I got no travelling expenses and was the only medical person responsible for the first, second and under-19s teams as well as for anyone else. The only other medical person involved was Dr. J.H. Lee, a really nice person, but was only really there at first team home matches and to help arrange any appointments needed for specialists. My chat with Mr. Hardcastle happened in the treatment area, and we were the only ones there. He suggested I sit in my clinic on Monday nights and just bill them if anyone showed up. I explained I had a busy clinic, evenings being the most sought after appointments. I already gave them Tuesday and Thursdays, sometimes Fridays at the drop of a hat, and that my request for a retainer for Mondays was fair. I would often treat at least 6 players. The mistake I made was not going in front of the committee, who understood my dedication, passion and the hard work to do all I could to help the team be successful. He basically went back to the committee, told them that I wanted more money and that I would not negotiate. I obviously didn't find this out until much later, and that was the end of that. The paper article on this matter went like this. The club are looking for a new physiotherapist after Penny Walker has decided to step down because of her expanding business commitments. Chairman Rodney Hardcastle said, "We are very sorry to see her go. She has done a great job for the club." Interesting. What a lying toad. If I had that many business commitments, why would I go and physio at Keighley, which was miles out of my way? Now, regarding my bodybuilding training and competition at this time, I was still training and had all the facilities of a fully equipped gym, not just the extremely limited equipment, a bench, barbell and dumbbells in my shed at Liverpool University. In the summer of 1986, I was back living in Yorkshire, having finished my degree in Liverpool. The last competition I did was in the North East Championships on the 20th of April 1986, just before starting my revision for my final exams at Liverpool University. From the summer of 1986 onwards, my world involved a lot of jobs to earn money to pay off my student debt, training in a proper equipped gym and studying at the Northern College of Massage. By 1987, my regular gym was at Muscle World, Aubrey. Towards the end of 1987 into 1988, I started to train with Dembo. In the August of 1988, I entered a EFBB show in Oldham, and I think I got placed 4th. I weighed in at 9.7, so was probably carrying too much fat. Photos taken at Muscle World Gym a couple of days later showed I had the muscle and I had the shape. I just needed the condition. We continued to train hard and I dieted more, the next competition being in December 1988. I weighed in at 8.4. My condition was better and I got first and qualified for the UK finals. Remember me mentioning going to Blackpool to watch the UK finals in May 1985 and making the decision that this was going to be my next goal? Well, 3 years later, I had the ticket. It was now when Dembo and I had to really pull out all the stops and get the work done back in the gym. Challenge set, game on, Cedar Nullis. At the same time, I was also studying, slowly building up a client base for my massage and juggling life, but enjoying every minute. I then added a further juggle, which you already know about, when I volunteered to help the under-19s rugby league team at Dewsbury. With all the genuine support and care around me, I was able to train really hard, get my exams, and develop some wonderful connections and friendships at Dewsbury Rugby Club. So, I will finish this decade off by detailing what would turn out to be my last bodybuilding competition, the UK Finals Harrogate 1989. From the end of 1988, Dembo and I knew I had a place in the UK Finals. The weight class would have to be decided nearer the competition date. The idea in the off-season was to eat enough food to have good strength to grow muscle, eating the right food to allow repair and thus growth of your muscle fibres. The 2 nutritional books I had in the 80s were Muscle Growth and The Ultimate Nutrition, both by Bernard Bevery and Arthur Fairhurst, very informative. I also got the Muscle and Fitness magazine every month, which often covered nutrition. But just as with your training, it takes years to figure your own body out. What works for one person will not necessarily work for another person. Bodybuilding is all about patience and a long-term investment. So many today, now that muscle is accepted and fashionable, expect overnight results. But you are talking years of hard basic training just to get a foundation. After that, you can start to adapt and concentrate on bringing up weak areas and developing the look you want. Listening and watching others is important, but the thing is to connect to yourself. The mind, body and muscle connection. You either have it or you don't. Bodybuilding being a very mind-driven sport. For some reason at this time, probably my workload, studying, setting up my clinic, rugby and training, I stopped writing training and diet journals, so all I can say is that I trained whatever we decided and let Dembo do the programming. I do remember him having me run up and down the fire escape stairs at the side of the gym after a leg session to get more definition. I just did whatever he said. I trusted him, he knew his stuff and was in my head. A place any good coach should be, if the coach/athlete relationship is to reach heights in training never before achieved. If you have someone in your corner that can do that, you are very, very lucky indeed. I was Very, very, very lucky. Dembo recalls during this preparation time how after finishing a training session during the strict dieting phase, I was shredded, veins popping out everywhere. Usually you are quite flat, tired and very hungry at this stage. He asked me what I had to eat. I said a tin of tuna, but I really shouldn't have. He said, well, whatever you ate, that's gone straight into your muscles. I was interviewed and photographed by a magazine called Muscle & Co. It was probably after qualifying in December 1988. In the interview, I speak about how complicated the pre-competition diet can be. People think bodybuilding is very complex, explains Penny. They make it complicated themselves. It is really very simple, but they get bogged down with all the fancy exercises and diets that they lose track of what they are doing. They would be much better off getting a basic physiology book and just read what muscles are comprised of. A big problem with a lot of bodybuilders is rest and recuperation. They just don't rest enough. They overtrain all the time. The muscles grow during the rest period. Also, people make competition preparations very complicated when it doesn't need to be. All this sodium loading and carbohydrate loading, your body wants to be balanced. If it's not balanced, it tries desperately to balance itself. If you don't have water, your body will retain the water that you have got. It automatically thinks there is a drought on, so it holds water even more. People make the sport so complicated. The competition day arrived. EFBB UK Bodybuilding Championships Finals, Sunday the 15th of October, Harrogate, Yorkshire, 1989. We had both worked really hard. My condition was good, my body fat low, and now it was time to show what we had managed to achieve. There is a mystery story connected to my UK final preparations. I have photos of my qualifying win with Kay and Dennis on the stage with me, December 1988. There are photos taken at Muscle World Gym at the end of January 1989 of me in out of competition condition, taken so comparisons could be made throughout our UK preparations. But that's it, and where the mystery begins. To this day, Dembo doesn't know what happened to the film. Remember, there were no smartphones, I call them spy phones, and God knows what else. Back then, we just had plain old cameras with films that you had to take to be developed. I have got about 4 photos taken by someone else of me on stage, but that's it. No real record of what we had managed to achieve. Dembo was gutted, and I still tease him to this day. Dembo, was I really that bad that you had to destroy the photos? Or, did you put a film in the camera, Dembo? It isn't and wasn't a big drama. I know from the few photos I have that I was in the best shape I had ever been in, and that was all down to Dembo. It was a real big show, and being quite local to us, some of the rugby lads came to support me. I hope I get this right, please forgive me if I don't. I remember from the under-19s, Nathan Graham, Mick Tong, Mark Haig came to support me. It's difficult when you are so dieted down, it affects your concentration and brain function. So many details of that day I can't remember. Dembo remembers that I had a very good posing routine and described it as stunning. I am not 100% sure, but I think the music I used was Patti Smith's Because the Night. I had to make up a routine which would show all the compulsory poses, highlight my best features and provide enchantment, grace and a certain amount of seduction. You are showcasing your hard work all the time you did those extra reps, all those times you pushed yourself beyond your limits because your coach had your back and was in your head. I never wanted to fail or let down the person I trusted the most in the world, my coach, Dembo. In front of my bedroom mirror, I would put together my moves, practice and change them until I was happy. You didn't get long to pose, but a good, well put together, interesting presentation could get you the points to place you higher. Although I always found it very nerve-wracking, I enjoyed the posing routine part of the competition. This is what Dembo said about my routine at the UK finals. It was stunning, and I can remember after you posing, Ken Latham, the organiser, compare for the show, who had vast experience, knowledge and years of running shows and judging them, looked at me and Kay, where we sat, and put one finger up and moved it, as if to say, she's got it. Number 1. If he had put his thumb up, I would have thought he meant you looked okay, but putting his index finger up and moving it, mouthing first, I thought, yes, she's done it. All that work, never missing a training session, and she's got it. Looking at the few photos I have of that day, I definitely was ripped, especially my abdominals, and the details on my back, double bicep pose, was crazy. It's difficult to see on the 4 photos I have. Maybe my glutes could have been better, more ripped. Possibly. While backstage, I overheard one of the girls say that she hadn't been training that long, and you could tell. The muscle has a different look when the foundation of years of hard work is missing. She was a bit puffy and her skin condition on her back was not good. The result, I got 4th. The one who was saying she hadn't been training long, beating me. It was a shock, and I ate more for Dembo than myself. He was so upset when he came backstage. But I said, never mind, Dembo. You got 1st place for coaching. Here's your trophy. I had got him a small trophy with world's number 1 coach and C. Denullis, yield to no one, engraved on it. He had to walk away for a little while to compose himself. He was so gutted for me. I wasn't angry, just disappointed with the politics. The girl that really shouldn't have beaten me, waving to one of the judges. Apparently she trained at that judge's gym. This was a big show. This was the EFBB UK finals. The reader can draw their own conclusions. It was while we were still backstage after presenting Dembo with the trophy and giving him the biggest hug for all he had sacrificed that I announced my retirement from bodybuilding competitions. I said, Dembo, it's taken us 2 hard years to get here, and I don't want to compete with people that have just been training for a short while and taking shortcuts that I am not prepared to take for the sake of a trophy. It's not what bodybuilding is about. It should be about making your body healthier, stronger, more functional, not taking health risks. I love my training, but the shows, I'm done with them. When I got out into the main hall, people I didn't know stopped me and said that they couldn't believe what had happened and that I was robbed. This gave me some confidence back that I hadn't totally let everyone down, because I was doing the show as much for my supporters as I was for myself. The rugby lads that were there were really gutted, and I was sad that they were sad. I was so grateful to all the support and love that people showed me that day. But now this chapter of my life was closed, and new chapters would begin. But first, let me eat some food. I was starving. End of chapter. Chapter 7. The Waiting Game and the Game of Pool. Perseverance is critical. I achieve whatever success I achieve because I was unwilling to stop. Narnia Comanche. I was taken from ICU to trauma and orthopaedics. It was a long corridor with doors on either side. I'm not sure if half was trauma and half was orthopaedics. I just knew I was placed in a room. My bed was against a wall as I lie there. There was a big window to my right and a small room with a toilet and a sink to my left. Not that I could ever use it. As I lie, I would stare at the wall in front, which had a TV, which I never used. I didn't watch telly at home, just DVDs, so I wasn't the slightest bit interested in French telly. I really did not have the energy to be bothered with it. The state I was in when I arrived was that my right hand was sewn into my right groin. I was not allowed to move that arm at all. I had my pots on my legs, and I'm sure I had a pot on my left arm. No break dancing for me then. I felt anxious about leaving ICU. You were watched like a hawk. You felt safe. The feeling I had when I moved to trauma was different. I saw it as progress, but also feared if I was ready to be exposed to the world again. The bubble wrapping which I saw the ICU give a person was removed, and now my overall protection was not as protective. It is of course all fear-based emotion, fear of the unknown, fear of change from an environment you trusted to one you knew nothing about, fear of the fear itself. Trusting the process helps, but you constantly must install that trust into yourself while battling with your overactive, doubting and questioning mind. I had many conversations with myself, realising that I was physically paralysed to change my situation, but not mentally paralysed. Some, after the sort of trauma I had, aren't so lucky. For those around me, I think me having brain damage was their biggest fear. One of the reasons for my drive and desire to help others today is because I was protected from such a fate. To this day, I wonder how my head was saved from permanent brain trauma. Oh yes, you have the mental trauma, but I had seemed to have escaped actual physical brain trauma. That's when I realised this was done for me, not to me. The universe had a mission for me. All I had to do was have patience, listen, be guided, and accept the challenges placed before me. Easy, right? As my dictaphone recordings revealed, at times these challenges were unbearable, and I struggled badly with them. But I always had a tiny voice in my head saying, "Believe, it is going to be okay." Through my mental persuasion, I accepted this new environment and trusted the process. The staff were caring and very helpful. I only had an issue with one who didn't seem to have the same level of compassion as the others. I got the feeling she didn't want to be there. Neither did I. My memory of this time, as I write, is a little vague. Maybe the dictaphone recording will be more informative, but I want to write this before listening and writing that information down. The reason for me doing it this way is because I want to write my story in a reflective way after knowing all the events that happened on this journey. I remember having had my right hand chopped off and sewn into my right groin by the time I was in trauma and still wearing my Chanel tuber grip dress, which my plastic surgeon had kindly put me into. This tuber grip dress was around my shoulders and to the top of my thighs. Its purpose was to keep my sewn-in arm from moving. No movement allowed, no turning, no change of position, nothing for over 3 weeks. I was trying to accept my fate of not being able to move and tried to think of an animal or a creature that had no arms or legs that could move, and how did they cope? I came up with an earthworm. Being a gardener, they were my special friends who were working hard to improve my soil. It's always a bad sign if your soil is wormless. It means, to me, that the soil is of poor quality and lacks nourishment. Having chickens, I was always sad and shooed them off if they came to collect a quick snack on my worms. But the chickens aren't stupid, for they knew the value of earthworms, as I found out when I did my diploma in Chinese herbal medicine. In Chinese herbal medicine, the Di-Long was used for a tonic for the blood. The use of Di-Long is banned now, but nobody has told my chickens. Maybe I need to have a word with them. So I am a worm. That's all the movement I am allowed and can do. Just pretend you were a worm, and then you will feel less frustrated. That's what I kept telling myself. Being a worm was okay until the worm became very, very sick with diarrhea, dysentery, or whatever the hell it was. The worm was not happy and in a lot of pain. Every time a bout of excruciating pain came, I imagine it must have felt the same for the earthworms every time I accidentally spiked them with my garden fork, a thing I tried to avoid doing and always felt bad when it happened and instantly apologised to the worm. Hospitals are obsessed with poo, bowel movements, and God help you if they think your poo isn't enough or if it is stuck. My world in that room was just about to change in a painful and smelly sort of way. I am not sure if I had had the operation to put barbecue skewers, pins, in my left toes before this problem started, but I think I had. I can't imagine it being physically possible to operate on anyone in the state I was in. But I did have many procedures. I was always on the block, the operating table. I counted around 15 procedures at Nantes Hospital. The block was my second home. I didn't like going there, but what choice did I have? I knew that all the staff were helping me to recover, but it still was a scary journey every time. By now I had taken them up on the offer of giving me something to make my coming round after an operation less traumatic to me. I don't know what they gave me, but just before the porter came to push me down that terrifying route, someone would bring me a tablet that you had to put under your tongue. This tablet worked because in comparison to the times I didn't take it, my anxiety in coming round was so much calmer and far less frightening. For some reason, I remember vividly a time that I had an operation. I don't think I was in ICU. I must have just moved. Maybe it was the operation to put the plate in my left wrist. If it was before I took them up on the offer of the tablet. I was wheeled down corridors and into lifts. Nantes Hospital is huge. It was a different route to the one I went on from my ICU room. I was so scared. When you are lying in your bed, the only thing you see are the lights in the ceiling flashing past. The porter walked and pushed quick, but everything is in slow motion. The fact that you were being taken to the block didn't help. The meaning of this from the English history books being that you are being taken for your inevitable death and your head chopped off. My picture of this being reinforced when someone brought me an historic-based novel where they had all been sent to the block. However, when I started taking that little pill under the tongue, I didn't really care about going to the block. But even with the tablet, the whole experience was still very psychologically distressing. On the above occasion, I remember I was very anxious about going to the block again. I had concern for my sewn-in right arm, and maybe when they were moving me and operating, they would damage or rip it out. I knew they were all extremely professional and amazing medical people. I was so lucky to have them. But what if, like the nurse in ICU, they forgot about my other injuries and turned me too quick and pulled on my right arm? My mind was working overtime. I tried to talk to the porter to distract my overactive brain, but I was scared stiff. As I got to the block, I was wheeled to a waiting bay just outside the big glass automatic doors which led to the operating area, the block. I remember thinking that it's like a bus station. Trolleys arriving, park up in their little bays, stationary until they move off to their next destination. The purpose of this bus station-like environment was for someone to come and check your name tag, your date of birth, and the operation that you were about to have. They took your blood pressure and put you a line in. Then you had to wait and wait until they were ready for you. For each bay, you could see a TV, and I remember some French program going on about politics. Instead of being distracted by the TV, I spoke to my team, who had visited me in my ICU room. I asked if they would come with me into my operation because I was really scared. Would they mind just watching over me and all the medical staff as they had done before and as they did while I was stuck in the car? I gave my fate up to the universe, but put in a request to be around for longer. I still had things to do. I was very emotional and wanted to burst into tears and run away. But I was still a worm and couldn't run anywhere. A person arrived, dressed differently than the person who had taken my details. She had a hairnet unlike the previous person had put onto me. It reminded me of the time I worked at Fox's Biscuits in Batley, West Yorkshire, as a student over 30 years earlier. Then my only stress was the chocolate bourbons that I struggled to pick up off the conveyor belt to place in boxes. They often went flying up in the air. I preferred doing custard creams. They seemed to behave themselves better. She had a nice friendly face and smiled, checked my name, and then pushed me through the large glass automatic doors. I passed another area that had bays in it and some beds with people wrapped in sheets and blankets, surrounded by machines. She pushed me through some more doors and then into the block. In this sterile, clinical place, people gowned up were busy doing things. Every time I got pushed into the block area, I always went cold. I don't know if that's because the room was actually cold, or I felt cold from its atmosphere. It's then time for the countdown. You are put into position. I remember when they were taking my right hand off, when I was in ICU, they placed my arm on a small sort of platform attached to the side of the operating table. Then the next thing is to be transferred from the bed to the operating table. The transfer from the bed to the operating table was always a manoeuvre I dreaded, but usually there were 4 people to transfer you. It was always painful and the block never comfortable to lie on. On this occasion, I think I am correct in thinking it was my left hand getting all the attention for the metal plate to be put in. I also think Dr. Lesko came to keep an eye on my right arm check it out and redress it while I was knocked out. My recording of this is maybe more accurate. I can't remember if my pins in my left toes were already in or if they were done on this occasion. What I do know is my earth angel was here again, and that always brought me some inner peace. The anaesthetist talks to you while tightly holding the mask over your face, and someone else is connecting you up via the line that was placed in your vein when you were in the bus station. It's all very weird, and trying to let go of your natural desire to fight what they are doing to your body is so scary and difficult to do. The counting distracts you, and you are taken somewhere which allows you to stay alive but not feel the brutal procedure you are about to have. All my fears of being at the dentist as a young child rushing back to the forefront of my memory. I never asked how long my operations took and how long I was in this semi-dead state, but we are talking hours. I remember coming round after this particular operation being really scared as I opened my eyes. I could see people in other beds at various stages of recovery. Tears were rolling down my face as I was paralysed. I tried to shout, but there was no noise. I was so scared. It was like awakening from a really bad nightmare. Confusion, panic, pain, and desperation all stuck together in one large lump of emotion. This feeling, which seemed to last forever, but it could have only been about 15-20 minutes. But what is time? Does time differ when you are put in the semi-dead state? Does time even exist at all? What is time? The scariest thing in the disconnection of your mind and body, or is it a disconnection from your soul? Your body is there, but you can't feel or move it. Your voice is there, loud and clear in your head, but there is no sound. Has your spiritual connection with self been put on pause, and it's the universe's decision if you are reunited? Whatever it is, it's damn scary. And I don't think after this disconnection you are ever quite the same again. It's as if you now vibrate differently. You see life clearer in a new way. It's as if you have been given a new set of eyes, ears, and a new understanding of life. It's as if you have been cleansing of your soul. It's not just the medical staff working on you while you are in this ego-free state, but some other universal energy that empowers you with emotions and feelings that you failed to feel before. I didn't know then, but this change would create many internal battles. They were like tests to see in which direction I would go, back to my programmed way that society had shown me, or take a different, isolated, less travelled, overgrown path that only a few choose to go down. The reconnection of either my soul, spirit or mind to my physical body started to happen. First I could move my head, and then sound, though weak and very quiet, came out of my mouth. I was so very cold, and the rest of my body took a while before I felt it again. In fact, I think I didn't get the full reconnection of my legs until I was back in my trauma room. This process of disconnection and reconnection was so traumatic to me that I requested assistance for my next block visit. This would come in the form of the little tablet you put under your tongue that I mentioned earlier. Now, getting back to the poor sick worm with diarrhoea. From the moment I was taken by the helicopter to hospital to move into my room on the trauma ward, I had not had a bowel movement, about 2 weeks. This did not concern me. I wasn't eating, I wasn't moving at all, was on medication known to cause constipation. Nature would take its time, all in due course. No, not in hospital. The fact that I had been living off medication, my body full of drugs, and still having the residue of them, didn't seem to matter. I honestly believe if they had given my body another week with fruit and veg, and the permanent removal of the heavier drugs, my poo would have arrived in its own sweet time. But no. I was sent for an X-ray, which gave them the ammunition to start the brutal attack on my intestines. I was told I had a blockage. Maybe the poo was having a rest, taking its time to get to its destination. How did they know it wasn't moving? They only X-rayed me once for the bowels. I am well aware that they were worried about bowel movement, but my bowels were having to adapt to different circumstances, so their usual pattern of behaviour would be different. They had all the evidence they needed to begin my nightmare of pain, embarrassment, stench, and sheer soul-destroying torture. They became obsessed with my bowel movement or lack of it. I was given this disgusting powder in my water glass, the only glass I had, so if I wanted to drink any water, which I was trying to do to keep hydrated, I had no choice but to drink it. Remember, at this stage, I could do nothing for myself. I was bedridden. My only hand wasn't so good because of the operation it had had to put the metal plate in. Holding my glass of water and a spoon at this stage being the only two things I could do with some pain and difficulty. I forced myself to switch on the portable little radio I had and to start recording on my dictaphone, but difficult tasks, but ones I persevered with. I was not only given the powder, but petroleum jelly, raspberry flavour, and no doubt some sort of tablet. Their mission was accomplished. Very soon the floodgates opened and never stopped for about 10 days. Let me set the scene for you. I am virtually paralysed in my bed, pots on both legs, my Chanel dress protecting my right arm sewn into my right groin, then suddenly a severe wave of pain hits your stomach area. You can't even double yourself up to try to make it go away. You know Niagara Falls is due any minute. You buzz for help, which naturally takes 10 to 15 minutes. They were always so busy and had a lot of people to care for. By the time your SOS is answered, you are covered in the stuff. Not pleasant, soul-destroying, and very embarrassing. It happened many times a day. It never stopped. If I had a visitor, they often had to leave the room due to them having to change me and the smell. None of my visitors complained, but it can't have been pleasant for them. I was getting weaker and weaker. Even trying to take a sip of water would set it off. But they still insisted on the powder and jelly, and then they added soup. Not just any old nutritional soup like you got as a kid when you were sick, but special soup. It was special, all right. It looked and tasted like dirty washing up water. I came to the conclusion that they were trying to kill me. The thing that puzzled and concerned me was where were all this stuff coming from? I hadn't eaten for weeks, not properly. In the end, I refused to take any more powder, soup, or raspberry flavoured petroleum jelly, or the prune compote that they tried to make me have. I really couldn't give a shit. No, that's wrong. That's all I could do. If I lived or died, I was losing a lot of weight, probably looked green, and was in so much pain. The nurse with a bit of an attitude and didn't want to be there, who started this whole thing off, then came up with a brilliant idea. To give me a drug to to bung me up. "What?" I said. "Oh no, you're not. You started this. If I die, I die. But you're not giving me any more of your crazy drugs. Where is the shit gonna go then, if you do that?" During this time, my plastic surgeon visited me, and the don't want to be there nurse transformed into a caring, concerned, loving nurse in front of my very eyes. I think it was more for the doctor's benefit than mine. Then a funny thing happened. He said his goodbyes and left the room with the nurse. Within 5 minutes he was back again and said that he had been told I wasn't eating. Wonder who told him that. I said I would start eating if they stopped making me shit all the time with their soup and potions and offer me some real food instead. Why couldn't this topic have been discussed in front of me instead of behind closed doors? I wasn't stupid. I had spent most of my life studying the function of the body and how to treat it. I had never come across any research that said making someone have dysentery for over a week and then blocking it up with drugs was a good medical procedure. I did, however, find something out in the early hours of one morning when I had to buzz for the night staff. By the time they got to me, I was covered from top to bottom in the stuff. When they came in, they said, "Not you as well. Why didn't you buzz?" I said, "I did." Apparently, the whole trauma ward had the same problem. They must have all been given the same soup, jelly and powder that I had been given. The girls cleaned me up and then put a nappy on me. Great. Now I can sit in it until morning. I did come up with a solution for the problem. I called it Diner Poo. You may have heard of Diner Rod, who you phone when your pipes are blocked. Why couldn't they come round and give everyone colonical irrigation? Problem solved. No pain, no soup, powder or jelly, and no shitty bed sheets. I patent this here and now. I probably talk more about this on my recordings, but I think we need to swiftly move on from this topic. The turning point in my situation came when one of the nurse angels came back on duty, a lovely girl who just seemed to get it. She asked if I was okay, and I said no, I really need to start eating proper food to heal this bowel problem and give the intestines a chance to work properly. Can I have some kiwi for breakfast and some pineapple juice? I need to feed my body something other than that medication stuff that they forced me to have. I think by now I had refused to have any more of their pooing medicine. She said, "Yes, I will see what I can do." That day I had kiwi fruit, green beans for lunch and some more vegetables for my evening meal. It all stayed good and I felt like a different person. Slowly though, I had to be careful, just small amounts of plain food. But the dysentery stopped and I could at last try to feed my body so I could aid my repair and recovery. I can't remember the exact days and timescale that I had to continue with the sensitive bowel. It used to come and go, but I was now carefully trying to use food rather than medication to improve the situation. There was one time when the porter came to take me for my legs x-raying, but he couldn't because my bowels had just started to play up. I suppose I should have been grateful it didn't happen in the x-ray room. How embarrassing would that have been? The people taking care of you don't judge you, but it is still soul-destroying and embarrassing each time it happened. An adult shouldn't pull their pants, even if they are paper pants. I got told a few times I was moving to plastics, but then it got delayed. I was probably in the trauma room over 2 weeks, with most of that time being allocated to very painful dysentery. But some good things happened while I was there. I got my dictaphone, a strange comfort to me to talk about my emotion and things that were happening to me. I also got my radio from Robin and Pat, which I listened to when sleep just wouldn't happen and my mind started working overtime, and you begin to think too much. What's that quote? Make sure your worst enemy doesn't lie between your own two ears. Lad Hamilton. Boy, can your mind have power over you. The key is to keep it all balanced. Not so easy with some of the challenges life tends to throw at you. Two other productive and pleasant things that happened was getting some massage and physio on my legs. She was very nice and good to talk to. From the very moment I got out of ICU, I tried to do massage on my legs, when my left hand allowed. Remember that it had a metal plating. I knew the value of massage from my years of administrating it to others, and I could feel a hematoma in my right thigh. I was careful not to disturb the stitching. My broken bones in my legs were all compound fractures and had come through the tissue and my skin. The other positive and relaxing thing that happened was a lady coming to give me a facial. That was so appreciated and relaxing. My day-to-day activities continued in trauma, and I just had to wait for the decision to operate on my right arm and groin. Another mountain to climb. But I didn't think the universe would have given me Mount Everest. But that's what I got. Or that's what it felt like to me. End of chapter. Chapter 8. More rugby, more study, and football. Don't wait until you've reached your goals to be proud of yourself. Be proud of every step you take towards reaching that goal. Author unknown. I can't remember the exact way I ended up at Keighley Rugby League Club. I think they needed someone, heard I'd left Dewsbury and contacted me. When I got to Keighley, the coach was a big bearded Welsh guy called Tony Fisher, and his assistant was Peter Asbury, nicknamed Razza, a crazy Neil Diamond fan. I remember he went to see him in concert. They both knew my dad, for they began their careers probably around the same time. Tony Fisher was full of passion, and the half-time coaching was on the same decibels as those of Maurice Bamford's half-time coaching. There is no doubt that these men achieved so much and gave so much of their lives to rugby. I am not judging their methods, often it worked. However, sometimes I had to pick up and heal the psychological scars some of the players had from these coaching methods, and often the respect of the coach soon being lost. I didn't have many problems with Maurice and Tony, but after Fisher left, the coach was a Mr. Peter Rowe. Now things became interesting. He could never look you in the eye. The general feeling at Keighley was different than the one at Dewsbury. It was a little bit frosty. Maybe there was some struggles going on behind the scenes. I knew the smaller clubs always struggled financially. I suppose I was spoilt at Dewsbury from the family-like atmosphere that was given off as soon as I got there. Keighley seemed to need time to accept any newcomer. The team appeared to have a lot of injuries, little problems that needed a week off playing to get them back on track. When you first start with a team, and especially the coaching staff, it takes a while for your suggestions to be heard. You have a coach under pressure to keep his team's position, and you have the players under pressure to keep their place in the team, be it the first or second team. Tensions can be high, and it's the physio's job to try and keep the players calm, confident and fit. I didn't have too many problems with Tony Fisher or Peter Asbury. If you proved your worth, worked hard and were dedicated, you would earn their respect. But when Peter Rowe arrived, within a very short space of time, I realised that there was no respect, and eventually my respect for him slowly eroded. I knew a new broom sweeps clean, but there is a right and a wrong way, an agitated way or a calm way. Agitation was growing fast amongst the players. We were all treading on eggshells. Rowe's favourite saying to me when I was treating someone was that it was all in their minds and that they should run it off. He had played with some fantastic injury, and according to him, he kept going. What a hero. While sat in the dugout one Saturday for a home game for the second team with Peter Rowe and his assistant Ian Fairhurst, Peter said to me, "I have a back problem, can you take a look?" I turned to him and said, "Peter, that's just all in your mind," and then I had to run on to one of my players. I had no respect for the man, and I think the feeling was mutual. I showed him minimal attention, only when I had to. Every week the players and I would guess who was going to get the boot next. One player, Andy Tyers, who had an ongoing knee injury, said he thought he wouldn't be long before he was gone. I stated that it might be me, before you, and it was. There were a number of things I rebelled against while working with Peter Rowe. One was being on the players' bus for away games. I lived in Dewsbury. Keighley was about an hour away if the traffic was going good, either around Bradford or over the tops. It was always busy, roadworks and often bad weather. Remember, rugby was still played in the winter. On one particular day, we had an A-team match away, but the team's ground was nearer for me to drive straight there rather than driving to Keighley, to sit on the team's bus, to be on the bus which goes back to where I have just come from. Logic, right? I told them it made more sense to meet them at the ground. I think it was at this game that I had an argument with the coach. I was sticking up for one of the players. When the coaching staff wanted someone gone, they would start to pick on them and try to trigger them. I saw this so many times. I had already made my mind up that I would leave at the end of the season, staying because I was contracted to do so and for the players. I didn't want to let them down. I turned up at the club the next day, a Sunday, for a first team home match. Peter Rowe told me I was sacked. Boy, must I have power over him for him to be that scared that he had to get rid of me. His actions amounted to a cowardly, weak, frightened individual, probably going back to some childhood or life wounding. We all have such woundings. It's whether we acknowledge them and deal and heal them that determines how much of that shit we choose to carry around with us, and ultimately blame others or situations for that shit. His actions were not only childish and immature, but illegal. I had a contract with the club. He had no authority to sack me. It was obviously calculated because he already had a person there to be physio. His weakness and childishness continued the following week when I returned to the club for a meeting with the committee. Having realised what had happened at Dewsbury with the chairman Rodney Hardcastle, I took a friend with me, Glyn Robinson. I knew him from the gym. He was involved with the unions, a spokesperson for the nursing union. Glyn was used to dealing with disputes and bullshit. Rowe kept us waiting out in the cold before he would come to the meeting. He was sat in the stand like a king on his throne. The players were running around the pitch, and I was stood at the corner. Most of the lads acknowledged me and said hi, but a couple didn't, one of them being Ayres, a star player who I had to work on a lot. he was injured on a regular basis. I thought to myself, you yellow-bellied toad, one of life's lessons. Some people are takers, and some people are givers, some weak, some strong, some cowards, some brave. You meet them all in life. The key is trying to recognise them and keep your own integrity and standards. When the meeting finally got going, Roe told a load of lies and I told some home truths. He was very agitated, aggressive in his manner, and eventually stood up and shouted in the meeting, "Either she goes or I go," and then stormed off. He had a paddy like a young child. Like I said, I must have scared him with my power of honesty. I call his syndrome the small balls syndrome. And what usually goes with small balls? Yes, you guessed it. A big, arrogant ego. So that was that. Again, there is a bit of a pattern emerging here, but seeing how some of the players had been treated, I realised it was a gift. I needed to be away from this environment, the deeper problems at the club coming to light a little later when they went bankrupt. Keithley then refused to pay me what they owed me. Within a week of that meeting, Maurice Bamford was on the phone asking me to go to Bramley, as he was the coach there. I was at Keithley from the middle of 1990 to 1993, going to Bramley in 1993. One ex-Keithley player described Peter Rowe as a petty, vindictive, bullying coach with his favourites, and that is why he faded away. I would say that was a fair summary. There were some very good players at Keithley, but I think being close to the Bradford Northern Club sort of overshadowed them and the club. People involved in the Bramley Club were businessmen, an accountant, solicitors and a pharmacist who had a number of chemist shops. One of these lead solicitors put a letter together for me to send to Keithley. They said they had not got the money to pay me. This meant I could make them insolvent. Don't remember all the legal law of it, but it only took one letter before I got the money they owed me. Before moving on to Bramley, I must mention a person who I met through working at the Keithley Club, Andy Tyers, a big guy who unfortunately had ongoing knee problems throughout his rugby career. He was one of those intelligent, thinking and knowledgeable rugby players, and it could be seen when he played. I think his bad luck with injuries never allowed Andy to reach his full potential. His passion and love for the game was infectious. He was a good man manager, knew how to talk to people, told you things straight while having compassion, understanding and concern. He got shipped off to play with Nottingham not long after I had left Keithley. Throughout this period, I was still training, though as you all know, I decided in 1989 to stop competing and concentrate on my business, do more study and the rugby. I continued to study at the Northern College of Massage and in 1990 completed the sports therapy course and in 1993 completed the advanced remedial massage course. Also, between 1992 and 1994, I went to the Football Association Centre of Excellence at Lilleshall to complete their treatment of injuries course, a very intense, excellent course and difficult but informative course. It was a residential course and the group of people on the course supported each other coming from different backgrounds, usually involving football. Lilleshall is the place where all the famous footballers were sent to have intense treatment and rehabilitation when they were injured. The likes of Gazza, Paul Gascoigne and David Beckham all going there. Because we were residential, we ate in the same place as the footballers, but I didn't know who the hell they were. My fellow students did, and they used to say, "Look who's there." I didn't have a clue. While in the line for food one day, I heard a Yorkshire accent, so started chatting to this young lad who was at Leeds United, I think. He looked very young, but later I found out that big clubs would sign up any young lad who stood out, keeping them at the club, bringing them up the ranks and releasing them at 17 or 18 if they didn't come up to expectations. How cruel and psychologically disturbing was that for a young teenager? This young lad was Alan Smith, whose career did take off. Another player there who I talked to for quite a while was Michael Thomas from Liverpool. I felt connected to the name because of Mickey, my runner, who had the same name. He was a Michael Thomas also. In fact, Dembo and I brought Mickey to Lilleshall to get a fitness test for information that could enhance his running. I think when we got there, the man doing the tests thought it was the Liverpool player Michael Thomas, not our Michael Thomas, because there were newspapers and photos in the room there about Michael Thomas, the football player. Maybe he wanted an autograph. He didn't mention anything, and we started the fitness testing. The test was long. It tested lungs, blood oxygen, flexibility, strength, etc., etc. Our little Mickey, who was still at school, was on the treadmill about 40 minutes. They kept increasing the resistance and Mickey just kept going. Dembo and I left Mickey with his testing and we went to the canteen to get some food. Also there were the Wigness Rugby League team, who were there at a training camp before a big final. I think the year was 1993. If it had been 1993, the final at Wembley would have been the Challenge Cup with Wigness and Wigan, arch rivals. Wigan won that match, the score 20-14. The Wigness team were eating, and the Wigness players were taking the mickey out of Jonathan Davis, making fun of, because he was getting salad while the others were having pies and chips, just anything but salad. We went back to get Mickey and to discuss his fitness test. Mickey had short hamstring muscles, which would need stretching and flexibility. The full results coming later, 3 pages. The person who tested Mick said he was the 3rd best he had ever tested, the other 2 being world-class runners. What a fit young lad. That was very impressive test, Michael. Also, in the 1990s, another dedicated young man, passionate to his dreams, would visit my clinic. I helped him with tight hamstrings and any other injuries that affected him. He lived in Murfield, the next village on from my clinic on Huddersfield Road. I sort of knew him and his father through my work with the amateur rugby club at Dewsbury Moor. Richard Silverwood was just beginning his journey. I would conclude a fated journey. At first it was amateur rugby league, which Richard was refereeing. That soon changed. I remember he came for his leg massage before his first pro game between York and Batley Bulldogs. He was nervous but also excited. I was pleased for him. I had watched his progress and dedication over the years and had a feeling he would do well. He was so dedicated. He did do well. He became an international referee. Richard's achievements are impressive. His first Super League game was Halifax versus Salford in 2001 at the young age of 24. He refereed 415 Super League games, including the finals in 2010, 2012 and 2013. He also was awarded Rugby League Ref of the Year in 2006 and in 2010, plus awarded International Ref of the Year. His achievements don't stop there. Richard also was the ref 4 times for Australia versus New Zealand in 2009, 2010, 2011 and 2012. The 4 Nations also in 2010, again Australia versus New Zealand. He was also the ref at the Rugby League World Cup final in 2013 and the Challenge Cup final in 2006, 2010 and 2012. Amazing, Richard. Your dedication and hard work paid off. I am so pleased for you and proud of all your achievements. Another Rugby League official who was a regular at my clinic was a linesman / touch judge called John Glover. He was very interesting to listen to, and he kindly gave me a photo of himself and the other linesmen when he went to the Wembley final, an achievement he was so proud of, and rightly so. The photo hung on my clinic wall amongst all the other amazing photos. Just like all the other people I was blessed to help and have a connection with, I was able to see them grow and achieve the challenges that they had set themselves. It was so encouraging and pleasing to me. I embraced their strengths. They all gave lessons to me on how to continue, even when the odds may have been stacked against them. These lessons did not just come from the athletes I treated, but many others. 3 that are no longer with us included Mrs. Colbeck from Ossett. When she had to go into care, I promised to have her dog Susie. I did, and she lived to a grand old age, just like Mrs. Colbeck. Mrs. Colbeck once told me that her mum said to her that her tongue was so sharp that she would cut herself. Mrs. Colbeck's response, "No, it won't, because I always speak the truth." And she did. I told her she would make a good Prime Minister. She was so wise. Another amazing lady was called Lily Armstrong. She lived in Criggleston before moving to her daughter's house in Horbury. Her legs had given up, but not her mind. Her life story was unbelievable. Living in a mining area, her husband was a miner, and you can hear Lily's story at the Yorkshire Mining Museum. There was also Brian Allroyd, another star, who came to me after his stroke. I got him to the gym, and he got strong and started walking. He walked everywhere, miles and miles. He even took ramblers out on the famous walks in the Yorkshire area. A very intelligent man who achieved a lot in his career. All 3 of these people were my mentors. They had so much life experience and had been dealt some harsh battles that life has a tendency to throw at people. But they never gave in. Another great lady, also from Ossett, is Bessie Sykes, who has just turned 100 years old and still living in her own house. These amazing people were my university of knowledge about the real way of living. Very rare, beautiful gems that I will be eternally grateful to. An experience I was also grateful to have that occurred in my career was working with the Yorkshire Ladies Rugby League team, again in the 1990s. I have a medal given to me from the Lancashire vs Yorkshire Women's Rugby League match, Warrington 1991. I also remember going to Old Trafford with the Yorkshire team, where they played before the men's Premiership final. I remember because Alex Murphy was in the dugout taking the mickey out of women's rugby. He was known as Murphy the Mouth, and he knew I was Tank's daughter. I had some banter with him, and then he left the dugout to coach his team. Of course, the ladies' Yorkshire rugby team won. At Lilleshall, besides Alan Smith, the footballer, there was another Alan on the course, and again I noticed the Yorkshire accent. Alan Jackson was helping at Bradford City Football Club, the youth side. Because of the location, we kept in touch. I went to some football games to help out, and he came to help at some rugby games, so we could further our experience and knowledge. It's a very sad day when a person thinks they know everything. You must keep learning, expanding and growing. It's the essence of life, no matter who you are. Every day presents an opportunity to learn, and I always try and embrace that opportunity. Alan was involved with the youth side of Bradford City Football Club, and he asked if I would be interested in helping them in a tournament in Hamm, Germany. Of course, was my reply. I hadn't had so much experience with treating football players, so I was pleased to further my knowledge and experience. This occurred in 1995. I still have and wear the t-shirt. Not only was the tournament for the young lads from Bradford City, but the veterans, which included Alan. This veterans game was quite light-hearted, not as serious as the main tournament. So much so that our team of veterans had a tray of beer brought out at half-time instead of pieces of oranges. The event was full on. We were staying in a beautiful old chateau and were given pickled cabbage with every meal, but the village and area was stunning. I think Hamm was, and probably still is, a twin town of Bradford, formerly the twin town of Shipley, a district of Bradford. Only 10 years earlier, in 1985, the Bradford Club had a devastating fatal fire when 56 people lost their lives and over 265 people got injured. I was at Liverpool University at the time, and it was shocking to hear the news. I was deeply saddened by it. It was my county. I wasn't to know then that nearly 10 years later I would be involved with the young, up-and-coming players of the future at the same club. The team that Bradford took was full of talented young men. Some were on loan from teams like Everton and I think Liverpool, but they were being released from Bradford, and more than likely that would be the end of their professional football career. I felt for these young lads. They all had their dreams, desires and wishes squashed. I hoped for them that they would find their calling in life without too much psychological scarring. These young men gave it their all. I suppose in their position you never know who is watching. Maybe a scout from another club. Our team got to the final but drew with the other team, which took us into extra time, then penalties, then the golden shootout. It was so exciting and also very nerve-wracking. I so badly wanted them to win. They deserved to. I'd got to know them, and they were good lads. They did win. Fantastic. It was worth eating all that cold meat and pickled cabbage. Hey, lads? I can't leave this chapter without mentioning another football disaster a few years after the Bradford City fire. In 1989, by now I was back living in Yorkshire, which made the impact of the disaster so much closer to home. With the love of Liverpool and the people, this horrific mistake really got to me, as it did to most of the UK. It was the Dewsbury disaster. I already had connections with Liverpool, and a few years later a connection to the Sheffield area. I was also going to end up having a connection with the year that the truth and justice finally was acknowledged for the Dewsbury victims. That was the year 2016, 27 years later for the victims and their families. Believe me, when you are accused of something you didn't do, and there are lies, cover-ups, and only half of the information presented, you fight to get that truth out there no matter how long it takes. It's the only closure you have to the devastation and sorrow that is thrown at you. The year 2016 was also the year of my accident. Looking into the Dewsbury disaster, the investigation throws up the same shit and legal games that I was put through. The games are performed to blame the weak, innocent victims to save the face of the establishments. My conclusion from my own personal experience is that the police, lawyers, insurance, courts, judges, media and the government all piss in the same pot, making the weak and vulnerable their scapegoat. This is in order to cover up their mistakes, protect their position, polish their egos, save their careers and their big fat pensions, all because they made a mistake and didn't do their job. Although I experienced this in a different country, not the UK, it was the same game and the same shit. It can clearly be seen in the case of the Dewsbury investigation how the blame game began before any investigation was begun. Dewsbury disaster was a fatal crush of humans at a football match at Dewsbury Stadium in Sheffield, South Yorkshire, England on the 15th of April 1989. It was the Football Association Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. The police match commander, David Duckenfield, ordered exit gate C to be opened, leading to an influx in the two standing-only central pens in the Leppings Lane stand allocated to the Liverpool supporters. This led to overcrowding and the crush. A total of 96 people were killed, 94 of them dying at the scene, and 766 were injured. The match was replayed in May at Old Trafford, with Liverpool winning and going on to the final to win the FA Cup. Days and weeks after the disaster, the police fed the press false stories implying that hooliganism and drunkenness by Liverpool supporters had caused the disaster. This blame continued to be directed at the Liverpool fans, even after the Taylor Report of 1990 found the main cause was the South Yorkshire Police's failure to control the situation. The Director of Public Prosecutions ruled there was no evidence to justify prosecution of any individual or institution. I bet they did. The first coroner's inquest regarding this disaster, completed in the year 1991, concluded that all the deaths were accidental. This finding was rejected by the families, and they fought to have the case reopened. It was Lord Justice Stuart Smith who concluded that there was no justification. He was right about that, no justice, for a new inquiry in the year 1997. It can be seen how the game plays out. Slam any door supposedly there to obtain the truth, in the faces of the innocent victims, who they then try to silence and paralyse by, should I say, an allegedly corrupt system. It stinks. There are good, honest people in this corrupt world that will not be bullied, lied to, or used by anyone or any establishment. These families had to set up a support group, bringing private prosecutions against Duckingfield and his deputy Bernard Murray. It's no surprise that these private prosecutions failed in 2000. As I write this in 2020, we are already seeing the beginning of change. How the mighty will fall. We already have Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Andrew, I don't count him as a prince, and many more will be exposed, brought down by the people's justice. There are much bigger fish in these poisonous oceans, but I believe they will be caught, gutted and salted, eventually. The Dewsbury Independent Panel was formed in 2009 to review the evidence. In 2012, this report confirmed Taylor's 1990 criticism, revealing details about the extent of police reports to shift blame onto fans, the error of the first coroner's inquest, and the role of the other emergency services. Thus, accidental death ruled previously being squashed, and the creation of a new coroner's inquest. Also, in 2012, Operation Resolve was produced. 2 criminal investigations led by the police to look into the cause of the disaster, and by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, IPCC, to examine actions by police in the aftermath. In April 2016, the second coroner's inquest ruled the supporters were unlawfully killed due to grossly negligent failure by police and ambulance services to fulfil their duty of care. This is an horrendous disaster, and equally horrendous is the way the victims and their families and friends were treated for 27 years. It's just not acceptable. How many other cover-ups are there? How many that did get swept under the huge carpet of lies, cover-ups and injustice? It just shows where we are as a human race. People with power, position and usually money believe that they can do what they like and get away with it. This is slowly being eroded by people speaking up and sharing their story. The more people that do this, the more other people will find the courage to tell their story, and the more people will stop turning and looking the other way. The truth is powerful, and the universe will assist someone in their truth. My story is extremely mild compared to others, but it still devastated my world, and I still had to tread that lonely, dark path, looking for a glimmer of light. But it can be done, and slowly and surely the glimmer of light will appear. One of the main reasons for the book is for me to bring closure on an extremely difficult and life-changing event that occurred in my life. Another important reason is to help give hope to anyone who reads my story and help them believe that all is not lost. For it isn't. You just have to find another way. There is always another option, and sometimes you must be the one to create that option. Be bold, be brave, and be truthful. You will need a lot of patience. Justice can take a long, long time to arrive. But fighting for it makes the way ahead clearer for the person behind you. Sadly, the same injustice that was done to you will be done to others. Remember, divided we fall, but united we stand. End of chapter. Chapter 9. Stubby is born, the mental battle, and a new home. I don't want to not live because of my fear of what could happen. Laird Hamilton. I remember waking up in a different room, my bed in a different position, though the layout was the same. I was coming round from the operation to remove my right arm from my groin. I was now in plastics. I can't remember the specifics of the actual operation. My memory of all my block adventures sort of lumped together in one big memory. This is probably due to the basic routine of the block procedure being the same, just different faces administrating the same procedures. I remember in my days in my physio clinic, with my athletes being careful not to install fear into the person, explaining that operations are not a walk in the park. You have to be mentally prepared for your loss of mobility and pain, be it different from the pain that got you the operation in the first place, but still there is post-operative pain. The doctors and specialists tend not to highlight this, probably on purpose, for the patient's sake. The result is there is a lack of mental and physical preparation for the challenges ahead. I remember my work with Dean Hall, a professional rugby player, his situation being a good example of the need to guide and protect a person while on their path of recovery and healing. You will get to know Dean's story in chapter 10. My surgeon, Dr. Pichu, who I saw as my little Buddha of hope, inspiration and expertise, was an amazing surgeon, as were all the other doctors who operated on me. I was extremely lucky to have all of them on my team. Dr. Pichu spoke English well, and I saw a lot of him. From the moment I was taken by helicopter to the hospital, he put me back together with my dancing pole, plates, nuts and bolts, and his great expertise. As we got to know each other, there was a mutual respect, which I saw was given to him from his staff also, always a good sign. He was at the top of his game, but yet he had an earthly grounded, non-egocentric vibe about him. From day one, I had respect for him. I don't feel the need to give respect if it's not there. It's got to be earned. Remember my time with a certain coach at Keighley Rugby Club? With Dr. Pichu, if you asked an intelligent question, you would get an informative, intelligent answer back. He did shock me once, however, when I was asking about the plates in my right ankle and when they would be removed. He had already said the dancing pole and the nuts and bolts in my right leg would be in about 2 years. The plate in my ankle he wasn't sure, because he had concerns about the nerve dying and that had been damaged. He said the nerve could die. I said, it won't. I won't let it. Then he said, at one point we thought we would have to chop your right foot off. Oh, was my reply. From that day on, I moved my toes at least 3 times a day, and any other movement I could on that foot. I sent blood to it and healing from my mind and prayed. I already had an image of my movement being like Quasimodo or a zombie, with my broken hips, back, legs, and not to mention my handless silhouette. Losing the right foot would have definitely got me a part in a zombie movie. Though I had had all this experience and knowledge of post-operative pain and the need for recovery, I somehow thought the removal of my handless arm out of my groin would not be such a big thing. It won't be that painful. How wrong can one be? I think this operation happened on the 1st or 2nd of May 2016. If the 2nd, that would make it exactly a month after my accident, and I was still having operations to fix the trauma my body had been given by the accident and was still being put through. I realised more than I had ever done before how amazing this body of ours is, and more so how powerful our minds are within this body. The mind controlling the level of success or failure the body can achieve. As a human, most of us do not tap into this mind-body connection, and I would add to that the soul or spiritual connection that we have with our bodies, a thing I was now trying to do. The only way I can describe the pain in my newly birthed right arm was a pressure feeling, like you have been run over by a combined harvester. It was unbelievably painful, even with the high amount of pain relief I was on. In comparison to the pain I had in ICU when my hand was dying, it was totally different. This was a very tight pressure-like feeling, as if it was trapped under some extreme weight. I could feel all my fingers, thumb and hand, even though they were not physically there. It was heavily bandaged so I couldn't see it. It was throbbing and torturous, especially when the tablet, again under my tongue, started to wear off. The pain in ICU was one that filled my whole body and internal organs with a sick feeling, a sheer desperate pain. Don't get me wrong, the pain in plastics was desperate, but it seemed to just stay in my right arm, not my whole body. I knew my body had had a month of healing and repair, so that will have helped me to have more strength generally than when I was in ICU. But the psychological pain was very similar in both cases. Pain is fascinating. It's messages from your body to your brain and vice versa. Not so much in ICU. I was in such a physical and mental state it wasn't possible. But in plastics I tried all sorts to get me through the pain. I mentally pictured white healing light surrounding me. I imagined massaging the arm, the fingers, thumb and hand, giving them permission to relax and come out of a painful spasm. I still have to do that today. I talked to it and I accepted it. My soul loved it, so my body could connect and heal it. As soon as I got to physically see it, he was named Stubby. All the nurses and doctors referred to him as Stubby. He was accepted, not rejected, even though he had a lot of work and a lot of healing to do. I always, even today, introduce him to people as Stubby, and I talk to him all the time. Why is he a he? I don't know. He just is. When I eventually would leave Nonce Hospital to go to my next place of residence, I would realise how significantly important my act of connecting to my amputation was. How I had saved myself from so much time and anguish, allowing myself the permission to be different, disabled and special. Though the road was a rocky one and I stumbled many times, often not knowing how to get up again, because assistance never seemed to be there when you fell. But the saddest thing I learnt on this treacherous rocky path was that often you would be pushed down by others that couldn't or wouldn't accept your amputation. Being an amputee made you a danger to a lot of society. They think you may be contagious. They may catch the amputation, and then they will become mad and mentally unstable, just like the amputee. Best distance oneself from them. Make out they are mad, and better still, turn our backs and walk away. I am jumping the gun a bit here. I still haven't got out of plastics, and still oblivious to the way disabled people are looked upon and treated. But that would come soon enough. My world had become very small. It consisted of a bed and a small table, which at times frustrated the hell out of me, because the cleaner, or a couple of times the nursing staff, would have moved it to my right side. How the hell was I supposed to get anything off it then? I never left this bed world, no toilet world, no other world at all. If I went, which I often did, for an operation or x-ray, I still stayed in my bed world. I was even transferred into a bed world, like trolley, so I could be hosed down when they finally gave me a shower and washed my hair. This first took place in plastics, probably after Stubby had settled down a bit. Although it was cold lying on this slab on wheels, it felt great to have a proper shower and your hair washed. The girls in trauma were great. They would brush your hair, clean your teeth, and give me a bed bath every day. But to actually have water showered over you after over a month was something I was so grateful for. My parents managed to visit me while I was in Nantes. They flew from the UK to France and stayed about 10 days. My parents may have visited twice, but the journey to the hospital was a 4-hour round trip. By this time, Robin and Pat would have returned to the UK. There were still the animals to take care of and the boys to sort out with everyday life. Elliot, being 13, was still at school, and Davy, who had just turned 16 a few days after my accident, was in his final year of college doing his exams in June. Their lives had to continue as normal as it was possible. I was told very little about what really was going on back at the ranch. It was so wonderful to see my parents. They put on a brave face, but were shocked at seeing me as I was. They also happened to visit just after the birth of Stubby, and at the time of some of my worst pain. I know they wanted to change places with me, but they couldn't. Even seeing me in pain was better than not seeing me at all, and I think they got some comfort that I appeared to still be able to make conversation, smile, and be present in their company. I think it was a case of one scene was better than 1,000 tellings. They could assess their daughter with their own eyes, which gave them some level of peace, but also sadness and worry too. It was around this time that my dear friends, Kay and Dembo, got told about my accident. Pat and Robin lived close by, so they visited them on their return to the UK to break the news of my accident. Seeing as they got to France less than 24 hours after my accident, they were well informed and could explain the situation with correct information. Pat and Robin went to Kay and Dennis's house and told them there had been an accident. Dembo recalls thinking, "I fucking lost her. She's dead. I fucking lost her." He recalls it being a shock. A big, big shock. Kay was in shock too. They were all upset and sat chatting about me, about the past and what we had done. Dembo said he couldn't remember much because he sat numb and in shock. When I eventually got to visit them, the first thing Dembo did when he saw me was roll up my right sleeve and kiss Stubby and said hello. He was the first person to do that, and it meant so much to me. It told me he loved my disability as much as he loved me, and it was going to be all right. Every time I visit, which isn't very often, Stubby always is the first to get attention. Dembo explaining he only kisses Stubby because he knows I can't wipe my bottom with him. Oh, so that's the only reason, eh, Dembo? I will leave plastics now because my dictaphone recordings will have more information of my time there and be more accurate. I would like to thank every single person who took care of me. Just like the staff in trauma and ICU, they were kind, cheerful and hard-working, having to deal with difficult people in difficult circumstances. I thank each and every one of you. The day arrived that I was going to leave Plastics and Nonce Hospital to go to my new place of residence. The leaving date had been changed a few times, mainly due to availability of a room for me. Building up to this departure, certain things had to be accomplished, and my doctors happy with the state of my condition. I still had my barbecue skewers in my 4 left toes, so they needed to be removed before I left. This happened on the day before leaving, I think, or maybe even the day I was leaving. I was really stressed and terrified how it would happen. 2 young men came into my room, said bonjour, and then started unwrapping my left foot from the bedding covering it and its bandaging. I asked what they were doing. I'd never seen them before, and I didn't know who they were. "We are going to remove your pins," was the answer. "But Dr. Pichu is doing that," was my response. They ignored me. In fact, I no longer existed. I was very scared. They couldn't have had much experience. They looked too young. One was almost certainly a student. The one that looked to be in charge had a phone which rang. He answered it and then just left, not even bothering to cover up my foot, indicating that they would be back. I was now panicking. I'm very worried. Firstly, my gut was shouting, "Don't let them do it," and my mind was angry with their bedside manner or non-existence of it. They had this dismissive, cocky, arrogant attitude, and I didn't even exist. I pushed my red button and buzzed. I wanted to know what was going on. Where was my Buddha, the one I trusted and had total respect for? The nurse came in and I told her my concerns and asked if she could cover up my foot again. I also told her I was a person, not a piece of meat. I had feelings and there was no reason to be treated like I just had been, no matter how important they thought they were. She left and I went into panic mode, waiting for these two to return. In my desperation to calm myself down, I turned to one of my books on my small side table and opened it at a random page. "I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me," stared back at me, page 203, first paragraph, the book, The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. At the bottom of this page, it offered 8 principles of a constructive nature that you could do if a loved one or you are ill. In sickness, send for your minister, even as you send for your doctor. That is, believe that spiritual forces, as well as medical procedures and techniques, are important in recovery and healing. I couldn't believe the page I'd randomly opened. I calmed myself, closed my eyes, prayed that the correct person to do this for me would be sent. It was then dinner time, and my food was brought to me. Minutes later, Dr. Pichu came into the room to do my toes. Was I pleased to see him? He saw I had my food and said he would come back. I said, "No, stay. The food doesn't matter." He said, "No, I will come back. Bon appetit." I said, "What, with this food?" He laughed and left. So now I prayed again that he would return before the other two. About 20 minutes later there was a knock on my door, and Dr. Pichu walked in. My prayers had been answered. I gave thanks. "Right," announced Mr. Pichu. "I'm going to pull these out." "Will I get any pain relief before you do?" I asked. "No, it won't hurt," the doctor replied. "How do you know? Have you had barbecue skewers pulled out of your feet before?" He laughed and put all his weight behind pulling the first skewer out, then the next, and then the next, until all four were out. They were long, but his steady hand, expertise, and the spiritual forces involved meant I didn't feel a thing. The other two doctors, I assume they were doctors, arrived just as Dr. Pichu had finished. My faith in the divine intervention again being tested and again not letting me down. The other thing I had to do before my adventure to my new home could begin was to actually be put into a chair to get my body used to sitting again. It sounds simple, but it wasn't. The first time I was propped up by pillows and the nurses held me. I lasted about 5 minutes before my head felt really funny and dizzy. Over the next few days they managed with a hoist to swing me out of bed and into a chair, where I stayed about 30 to 40 minutes. Even though the physio had been treating my legs with some sort of machine that they wrapped around them, my body movements were so few and limited. Lifting a piece of coal would be a challenge, never mind a 25-kilo sack. The other thing that the staff had managed to achieve was getting the stitches out, which were many. Now I just had to wait for the ambulance to come and collect me. 2 ambulance men arrived, and I was transferred out of my bed world and into another, and pushed out of my room with the few belongings I had resting on my chest. I said my goodbyes, thanked the staff who were on duty, and entered a world I hadn't seen for over 6 weeks. It was very surreal. I saw the sky and clouds that were grey, and they had movement. I saw a tree and lots of cars, which actually scared me. It was so very strange. It's as if I had never seen these things before. They were alien to me, not part of my world. The noise, the smells, and the busyness making me uneasy and nervous. Part of me wanted the safety of my hospital bed and the staff around me, and part of me wanted that tablet under my tongue, and then part of me wanted to scream out loud that I had made it. I was alive. Despite all that had happened to me, I was given, for some unknown reason to me, the strength to carry on. I didn't know in this moment of exhilaration, of a feeling of a certain degree of freedom, that this feeling over the course of time would be cruelly and unlawfully taken away from me. End of chapter.